God called David a man after his own heart. He said it himself. Then David slept with another man's wife, had the husband killed to cover it up, and God never stopped him. God's spirit came upon Jephthah with power, gave him military victory, walked beside him. Then Jephthah made a vow that cost his daughter her life, and God never stopped him. God called Abraham the father of all who believe, chose him from every person on earth, built his entire covenant through this man's bloodline. Then Abraham lied about his wife twice and handed her to another king's household, and God never stopped him. Same God, same men he loved. Same silence at the moment they needed to be stopped. The question is not whether you noticed this. You noticed it. The question is whether anyone has ever actually answered it. 2 Samuel 11. Spring, the season when kings go to war. David does not go to war. He sends Joab. He stays in Jerusalem. He walks the rooftop at evening and sees Bathsheba. He asks who she is. He is told she is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, a soldier, one of his most loyal men. That information should have ended the story. It does not end the story. He sends for her anyway. And when the consequence arrives, when Bathsheba sends back the message that changes everything, David does not confess. He does not collapse. He engineers a cover-up so precise that it only fails because Uriah the Hittite loved his duty too much to sleep in his own house while his comrades were in the field. So David had him killed, and then David buried the whole thing under a marriage and moved on. And God watched every single decision. Here is what theology often glosses over. God did not intervene at step 1. He did not intervene at step 2. He watched 12 steps of deliberate wrongdoing from the man he had already called the greatest king Israel ever had. Why? Because God was not protecting David's reputation. He was writing a story. And stories that only contain clean people cannot contain grace. Judges 11. Jephthah is the son of a prostitute. He was thrown out by his legitimate brothers. He gathered worthless men around him and lived in the wilderness as a mercenary. This is who God chose when Israel needed a military commander. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He marched against the Ammonites, and before the battle, he made a vow. Whatever comes out of my house to meet me when I return in victory, I will offer it as a burnt offering to the Lord. His daughter came out first, his only child, dancing with tambourines. Now, there is a theological debate about whether Jephthah actually sacrificed her or consecrated her to a life of service. Scholars have argued both sides for centuries. But here is what is not debated. A father made a reckless vow. An innocent girl paid the price for it. And God did not stop the vow from being spoken. God did not stop the daughter from being the first one out the door. There is something in this story that refuses to be cleaned up, because the text does not excuse Jephthah. It records him. It preserves his daughter's 2 months of mourning as something women in Israel commemorated every single year. A nameless girl, an annual memorial. God did not stop the tragedy. He made sure the tragedy was remembered forever. That is a different kind of answer than the one we expected. Genesis 12. God has just made the most extraordinary covenant in human history with Abraham. Within the same chapter, Abraham arrives in Egypt during a famine, looks at his wife, and tells her, "Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well because of you." He handed her over to protect himself. Pharaoh took her into his household, and God still did not step in to say, "This is not who I chose." He struck Pharaoh's house with plagues instead. He got Sarai back. He let Abraham continue. And then, 25 years later, Abraham did it again. Same lie, different king. In Genesis 20, the father of faith, twice. And here is the detail that should stop every reader cold. God called Abraham his friend after the second incident, after everything. So why? Why doesn't God intervene? Why doesn't he stop the man he loves before the man he loves destroys something? Here is the answer that is not comfortable, but is actually in the text. God is not building a museum of perfect people. He is building a story about a God who chooses the broken, not because the brokenness is invisible to him, but because the brokenness is the entire point. David's Psalms after Nathan confronted him, Psalm 51, came from a man who had done what David did. Remove the sin, and you remove the psalm. Remove the psalm, and you remove the most honest prayer about guilt and grace in all of human literature. Jephthah's nameless daughter became an annual act of remembrance that outlasted every other judge in the book. The tragedy God did not prevent became the memorial God made sure was never forgotten. Abraham's fear, his failure, became the very soil in which God planted the promise again. Not despite the failure, after it. God does not stop his beloved from sinning because he is doing something with the sin that is greater than simply preventing it. He is revealing what love looks like when it refuses to leave. That is the question this is really asking. Not, why did God allow David to fall? The real question is, why did God come back for David after Nathan said, "You are the man"? Why didn't God stop Jephthah's vow? The real question is, why did God keep using him anyway? Not, why did Abraham lie twice? Why did God call him his friend after both times? The answer to all three is the same. God's love is not a reward for good behavior. It is not a recognition of your potential. It is not based on anything you have not yet ruined. It was already decided before you did what you did. If that sounds too good to be true for someone like David, then you have not yet understood what was written about you before the foundations of the world.